Good evening and welcome to Belly Up Fantasy Live. Of course, as always, joined by Chris Dowhower. Chris, how's it going?
Going pretty good, Adam. I have little technology issues as usual for myself. But yeah, just joining everybody from my tablet today, so I apologize. But really doing really good. I'm actually really tired. We had a great weekend. I think we're going to talk about a little bit, but went out to the Canton, Ohio for the expo, fantasy football expo that was. Got to rub, elbows with some of the higher ups, so to speak, and then also got to kind of get to see that they're real people, and it was a really cool experience. And unfortunately, we didn't represent Belly Up Nation very well. We played a football game, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Adam, if you want to jump in, because I don't want to bring up any bad memories of the trip.
Absolutely, yes. We did not have great showings in the flag football tournament, nor did we have a very good showing in the cornhole tournament as well. Dan made it to the second round. I did not make it out of the first. Flag football, we did not make it out of the first. However, we did lose in the first round to the eventual champ, so I think that's got to count for something. We made it all 8 plays. It's not like they knocked us out quickly. So I think we have something to hold on to, but we'll definitely be feeling that one up until next year. I'll have to come back a little stronger. Fantasy Football Expo was amazing. Seeing all the booths, seeing all the people throughout the weekend. Draft night out was awesome. Definitely shout out to them. It was really cool drafting alive with some really knowledgeable people. So definitely a great weekend throughout. Definitely recommend anyone interested, go ahead and make the trip next year. I believe We'll be learning dates for next year soon, but I think it's just the weekend after the Hall of Fame induction. But yeah, super excited. It was really fun.
Thank you, Bob Long, for having such an outstanding event. I mean, that was just a tremendous thing. It's just grown over the years. From my understanding, it started off with 75 people, actually 4 people at one point, from what I heard, up to 75 and up to 500, I believe, was the number that kind of hit. And also, shout out for all the people who came by on the expo on Sunday and kind of, came through the booths. It wasn't just fantasy people there; it was also a lot of fans. So, always know about next year. You talked about coming down. Yeah, I think everybody's always welcome, and shout out those who did.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to Bob Long again for putting on such a great event. Shout out to NBC Sports Edge for sponsoring it, and all the other great sponsors that were able to come together and make sure that we were able to have all of that room at the hotel. There were like 4 conference rooms for all the panels. We had like the entire basement, a huge setup in the hotel bar. I mean, we had 2 different floors of the Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium. We had free tickets to the Hall of Fame. Like, we got a lot of cool.
Yeah, I don't know that we weren't just on the field. We weren't just in the stadium. We were on the field playing football.
Right.
I mean, how amazing is that?
Yeah, not to mention having access to it kind of after hours as well for that little get together. So plenty of access to really cool places, as well as access to all of the cool people that we got to meet throughout the weekend. So again, I can't speak any more highly of the experience. With that, we'll get into some NFL news before we hit a quick break and make it into our main topic for today, which is the best and worst backfields in the NFL for fantasy this year. So the backfields that you might be wanting to avoid, or might be able to go, okay, like these 2 backs can coexist together, or at least one of these backs can at least provide you some value. So we'll be going through all of that after the break. But first, again, some quick hits in news. First thing, Zach Wilson's surgery was successful. That's kind of what we've all been looking forward to today, Tuesday, 8/16. Yeah. So his surgery successful. That timetable that was reported is at least looking like it'll be pretty close to accurate. What they believed the injury was, or like what the guess was with the meniscus and the bone bruise, is in fact what happened. So there were a lot of concerns that they were going to open him up and find out on the fly that it was actually an ACL, or that, it was something more severe. But it looks like Zach Wilson has missed out on anything too severe. Jordan Schultz reported that one of his sources said Joe Flacco is all but assured to be the week 1 starter. So I wouldn't expect Zach Wilson to start off the season, but we will see him, I think, sooner rather than later. Chris, what are your thoughts on all of that? Getting Zach Wilson, again, probably not back for that Baltimore game, but probably not too far out after that.
Well, you talked about some of the leagues that we got to do and one of the drafts we got to do while we were at the expo, and one of those was Super Draft and Superflex, I should say, and the quarterback position. Those who had Zach Wilson on their Superflex teams, which there's a lot of people coming in those later rounds, are celebrating right now because they have been holding their breath, probably not knowing what the hell they were going to be able to do. Mm-hmm. I also think this is a great fresher breath, great thing for a lot of the receivers involved. We've been big on Elijah Moore for the last couple of years on the show, particularly Adam has been, and we have big things hoping for him this year. We've heard good things come out of camp, so we want to kind of see Zach Wilson be in a position to succeed. I wouldn't be too devastated as a fantasy football owner if he was to miss the first week against the Ravens. Just saying, it wouldn't hurt too bad that maybe get him back in against a little easier game. But yeah, I think overall it's just great news. And I think that's one thing that we've all been worried about. Was there going to be something more than we kind of been hearing? And I think that the best case scenario kind of played itself out.
Yeah, absolutely. Not a good matchup that week 1 with the Baltimore Ravens. That would have been a tough start to the year, especially if they tried to force him back. So hopefully they will not. Our next little tidbit is that Antonio Gibson's little preseason run he's been on. Obviously fumbled in the preseason game, had some struggles there, started with the ones. After he fumbled, he got pushed back and ended up playing with some of the backups. He's had an interesting day of practice today. Offensive coordinator Scott Turner said you can't waste a possession. If you fumble the ball, that's a waste of a possession. The first job is to protect the ball. It's something that has to be fixed. So clearly he had an issue with his fumbling and what he's been doing throughout camp, and even the last couple of years that he's been in the league, having some fumbling issues. He did work with the first team during install, but also worked some punt protection on special teams and worked with the second and third string during practice. It certainly feels like it's at least a warning to Antonio Gibson. Like, this is still your job, but we have much more of these, and it certainly feels like it could be passed the other way. Chris, what are your thoughts there? I mean, this is a backfield we'll get more into, so we don't need to dive super into it right this second. But, I mean, what are your thoughts about playing him on special teams in practice, 2 weeks, 2-3 weeks before the season starts?
Yeah, this is one of a great premise for the show that we're going to be having today, and kind of, the things that you kind of are looking at and dissecting when you come into the backfields with the news and notes are coming out, what you saw in preseason. You mentioned the preseason fumble. You also saw him return back with that second team later on in the game. So there's a punishment there. It seems to be an ongoing punishment because this hasn't been an issue that's gone away for Antonio Gibson. He's been fumbling the last couple of years. And I'm not really sure, if this tough love thing is going to work or not work. What I am sure of is it makes me, more and more definite feeling that I am not taking Antonio Gibson on my fantasy team unless he's, just falls into my lap at an unbelievable value. This guy seems like the days are kind of numbered in Washington. They don't have a lot vested in him after this point. And we kind of saw, a lot of people who did well last year in fantasy football were Leonard Fournette owners. And a big part of that was because week 1, Ronald Jones fumbled the ball, and therefore it became the Lenny show from that point on. I think that we talked about the Washington backfield. We're getting more in depth about it, but we know it's going to kind of be a committee. That's what Ron Rivera's been kind of hyping up. Suddenly, that trio can turn into a duo real quick if you continue to put the ball on the ground. And I think Antonio Gibson's kind of is being served notice.
I mean, aside from just being a bad runner, the two things that most people don't necessarily always realize can really kill a running back is if you've got fumbling issues or if you've got issues in pass production. Like, to be fantasy productive, like, obviously, yes, you need to be that flashy receiver. You need to be that good runner. But I think those are the things that we can all see. Like, everyone can kind of figure those things out. But it's the guys that you need to be, again, good at pass protecting. You need to be able to hold on to the ball. You struggle with those two things, you can be good at you can be explosive, and it really just doesn't matter. You will get taken off the field.
I'm real quick. For dynasty wise, if you're an Antonio Gibson owner, what are you doing right now? Are you just panicking, or are you holding on? Don't sell low. What's kind of reaction in dynasty leagues? Because I'm sure there's a lot of owners like that out there.
Yeah, I almost think that you have to kind of hold at the current situation, just because it feels like his value is plummeting right now. And it still feels like, unless he fumbles again throughout this preseason, that he will start off the season at the very least your RB1. So I would just hope and, kind of hold on and see if the first couple of weeks he can recoup some value. I'd be looking to get off of him as soon as I can personally, because I do not believe in him in the long term. But I mean, he's dropped quite a bit. Talk about the last 10 days or so. So to at least just recoup some of that. I know in redraft, I think he's gone down almost like a round or two. You're starting to see him available, 5th, 6th round in certain instances. So things are getting interesting there. At that point, it's kind of hard to want to trade him away for that type of value. So to me, I think I'd want to hold and see if you can get him back to where he was coming into this offseason, or at least, where he was 3 weeks, a month ago.
One more question on regards to that is, you talked about you're not really buying his long-term future, and I tend to agree. But do you think there's a possibility he can reinvent himself somewhere as not just being a running back, which I think was always questionable, a transition, but more of the offensive weapon? We kind of saw like Deebo Samuel, for example, glorify, but a guy who can kind of catch the ball, a guy who can maybe hand the ball once in a while, but you're not depending on him to kind of be your bell cow or your main running back that you worry about those fumbles so much.
I certainly think you could, but I just don't think he's as efficient as a runner as those other guys are. Certainly not Deebo. Now, maybe he could be a comparison for a Cordero Patterson. I'd certainly say he could probably figure something like that out. But I don't know. There's only so many offenses that you can kind of pencil in that type of role for. I certainly wouldn't rule it out, but is it something that I'm going to hold on and hope for? I mean, I'm just not betting on it personally. So our next piece of news, which is we have a little piece of breaking news attached to it that I don't have down in my show notes, but I had written down that Drew Locke is finally working with the ones this week, meaning the gap between him and Geno Smith is at least tightening. There's no decision as of now in that quarterback battle, but as of it was a few minutes before the show, about 25 minutes ago, Ian Rappaport tweeted that Drew Locke, who was slated to start this preseason game, tested positive for COVID and will now miss Thursday night's game versus the Bears. This was a key opportunity for him to take this starting job. Chris, do you think that this, it gives a major leg up in this quarterback competition to Geno Smith, right? The game that he's poised to be a starter for, to get his reps with the ones publicly, he's now no longer going to have. That's big.
I think that's huge. I mean, look, we know guys aren't really playing all the preseason games as it is, and we're not really sure what games, coaches are going to play them and not play them. But typically, as you get closer to the third or fourth game, coaches usually aren't playing some of their guys anymore, or key starters. So Drew Locke missed a game where he basically would be out there with the starters, kind of show what he could do with the reps, take the first team reps all week long as well, which I think is huge. Is now you kind of go into next week, if Geno Smith shows out, or you're kind of, even if you do great in practice, it's still practice. What can you really do on the field? You really haven't had a chance to really prove yourself. He had a good momentum kind of building up. He's getting a lot of, hype in the sense coming out of the different beat writers that he's looking good. He looks better than Geno on the field in practice. It's just only a matter of time that he should be able to take the job. So I do think this is huge. I think this is also Geno's job in the sense that he hasn't made any major mistakes to kind of cost himself. So therefore, there's no really thing for Drew Locke to kind of show that he shines above Geno in this situation. And I think it's really going to hurt us, him moving forward this year.
Another key thing to this that I haven't seen anywhere, to my knowledge, there's only 2 QBs on this roster that would pencil in either
they have Eason.
They do? Yeah, they have Eason. But Geno would probably play a decent amount of reps as well with this, unless you think Eason plays 3 quarters or something. But
I think he definitely could. You saw for the Dolphins, Skylar Thompson play the entire game for them. For the Rams, Perkins played the majority of the game. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I wouldn't rule it out, but if Geno was able to get a lot of quality snaps as well, he could certainly widen the gap as much as Drew Locke is falling behind. But again, not the most.
It'd be a great time to give Colin Kaepernick a phone call, just saying.
You are not wrong. But until that happens, this is not the most fantasy relevant quarterback competition in the world. Because let's face it, the difference for a DK and Tyler is marginal, whichever it is. Finally, our last piece here. Matthew Stafford was a full participant with the first team in today's practice. Sean McVay said that they were going to ramp him up this week, said that Stafford's first day kind of being fully back, a full participant, no longer worrying about that shoulder. He said he looked pretty good. So, Chris, how does that make you feel if you were someone who, over the last couple months, maybe drafted some Stafford like I have?
Well, hopefully it's just being reassuring. I've been telling you all along, I really wasn't worried. This is something he was dealing with last year. There was something I'm actually encouraged by them trying to monitor and limit him in the beginning of the year. I hope that it doesn't kind of flare up throughout the season. I do think there was points in the season where you saw Stafford kind of struggling, particularly with some of the long ball and some of his interceptions that kind of resulted in that. And I wonder if they were kind of correlating. Having said all that, this is typically a baseball injury. It's more of a pain management thing. One thing I don't question is Matthew Stafford's toughness and his willingness that this guy's got a rocket of an arm. So as long as he continues to be able to fling the ball over the field, I have no worries. I just think it's kind of reassuring to know, like, hey, look, he's doing what he's expected to do. They kind of told you this all along the way. Rams are pretty good about being transparent when it comes to injuries overall. So I do appreciate, that. And I kind of think that's just kind of things people need to kind of watch. Everybody was overreacting in fantasy a lot of times. Like, oh my God, what happened to this guy, or what's going to happen? They kept reassuring you it wasn't a big deal. They were trying to reassure you that it was maintenance. And as we see it so far, so good.
What I will say, my experience last season, just to remind people, Sean McVay is the most honest coach in this league. If you'll remember, Robert Woods started off maybe the first 2 or 3 games not doing very well. Sean McVay said, this week we're getting Robert Woods involved. Sure enough, Robert Woods had like 9 targets that next week. Couple weeks later, he goes, this week we're getting Deshaun Jackson involved. That same game, Deshaun Jackson has like a 60-yard touchdown reception. Sean McVay is very honest about everything that he says. For a lot of coaches, I'll do the coach speak thing, but for him, I'm inclined to believe what he says.
I definitely agree.
But at any rate, so that's it for news. We're going to take a look at what Dan has to say about our fantastic sponsor, Manscaped. On the other side, we'll be talking about our favorite and least favorite backfields in fantasy football for 2022.
Fellas, the fantasy football draft season is right around the corner. CeeDee Lamb is good, but have you seen these beautiful balls? It's time to get your snake looking right for this snake draft with sponsors of today's show, Manscaped. The leaders in below-the-waist grooming have created a championship lineup with the Performance Package 4.0. Join the 6 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped and get ready for kickoff by going to manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping with the promo code BellyUpFantasy. Inside the Performance Package 4.0, you'll find their Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, Crop Preserver ball deodorant, Crop Reviver toner, Performance Boxer briefs, and a travel bag to hold all your goodies. Tom Brady didn't come out of retirement for you to have hairy balls. So slot it at the quarterback and get 20% off and free shipping when you use the promo code BellyUpFantasy at Manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping when you use the promo code BellyUpFantasy at Manscaped.com. It's time to put the PP back in a PPR league.
And we are back. Thank you guys so much for tuning in again. We're going to get into the main topic of today's show. But before we do that, we do have an additional piece of news that's kind of come in like right before the show. The Seahawks are just getting hammered today. So Kenneth Walker has a hernia. So that's just something to monitor, especially those are Pete Carroll's words as Dan, whose tweet is what I saw, as Dan tweeted, Pete Carroll has always been one to underplay injuries. So a hernia is already one where you're looking at about a couple weeks to a month. If this is a typical Carroll underplay, things could get really interesting. Rashad Penny also returned to practice today, I believe. So something to monitor there. Absolutely. Chris, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's gigantic. I mean, one of the things that Walker relies on is his speed and his quickness. Having any kind of hernia can definitely be lingering. It can cause other issues in the groin area. So I think this is something definitely to be monitoring and be concerned about. It definitely is going to boom Rashad Penny, I think, value in the sense that he's returned. You're always looking at somebody else because this guy isn't the most durable player over the last few years, especially during over the last 3 years. I think Rashad Penny might be looking at DJ Dallas, who had a nice game in preseason. You might be looking at some of the other guys to see is there somebody in that backfield that you want to kind of grab maybe in the later rounds, or if you're in a dynasty league, and keeping your eye on now because there's some different situations I think that can occur with this. If it becomes 2 months, 3 months, all of a sudden it's a rookie, a guy that kind of ease back into the offense. We've seen this before, as you kind of mentioned. You need pass protection, you need to be able to do other little things sometimes to get on the field. This can kind of put you behind the 8 ball, and I would definitely be concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. A tough one there. So his specific wording was he is dealing with a hernia issue. He said they don't know what it means yet specifically, but that's the synopsis from Pete Carroll. Continue. Yeah, what were you going to say?
I was going to say there is different degrees of hernias, so there is a possibility that it might just be, on the verge of becoming something serious that they can address now and maybe nip it and it becomes a quick, fix. So I don't want to necessarily panic Elliott Nation, but it is something
just something to monitor. Right. Yeah. At this point, it's just something to monitor. The other thing that Pete Carroll mentioned in this press conference is definitely a little interesting. So he was asked who's leading the quarterback competition. He says, I don't even have to say that. Geno's still the number one guy. He's holding that spot at this point. So firmly saying that Geno is the guy in front at this point, especially with Drew Locke being behind. I would wager to say that it feels a lot like Geno would be the week one guy.
Yeah, as I kind of alluded to, I think Drew Locke had to overly impress in a sense to get the starting job. I think Geno was given a position that when he resigned, from what I understand, that he would be able to kind of compete for that starting job and it'd be his in a sense to lose. The guy's shown that he wasn't a turnover guy. That Pete Carroll likes to kind of keep the ball. We talked about, Washington concerned about, Scott Turner's comment about losing possessions. I think you're going to see Seattle maximizing that in the best way they can. Especially early on. So I think Drew Locke, while he looked great in practice, from what I understand, you wanted to see that wow thing out of him to kind of solidify that I have to be the starter. I think he kind of had a chance to show that. I think that's where Geno has been the starter. And Pete Carroll's kind of said that pretty much the whole time that, he's our guy until he shows otherwise.
Absolutely. You mentioned Scott Turner there. We're going to get back to Washington. They're the first backfield we're going to look at. So that's our main three guys here are J.D. McKissic, Brian Robinson, and, of course, Antonio Gibson, who's dealing with his own issues, again, throughout the weekend that we mentioned earlier in the show. So kind of break down this backfield for me. What are the roles you expect them to have? And is there any fantasy value that you're seeing in the between the three guys?
Yeah, so for me, I think it's a pretty clear cut that J.D. McKissic is going to be a third down pass catching back. You're going to probably see him in the 2-minute and 4-minute offenses. When they fall behind, double digits, he'll probably be out there predominantly. I think that when you look at Brian Robinson, he's already identified as kind of that smash mouth guy, that guy who's going to probably get a lot of the red zone opportunities, the guy who's going to probably be the short yardage guy. But I think that he might be expanding that role, as we kind of alluded to kick off the show, that because Gibson's really struggling with his role, where I think he was kind of that middle guy. Back in the day, the Saints was a similar backfield I used to see this with. Well, they had a Mike Bell, a Pierre Thomas, and Darren Sproles. Sproles was the clear pass catcher. You see that with McKissic. Pierre Thomas was kind of that guy who could do a little bit of either. The guy could be a pass catcher or maybe run the ball. I think that was supposed to be Gibson's role. And then you saw kind of, that bigger smash mouth guy, the kind of physical back of Mike Bell that kind of, gets the short yardage stuff. And I think that you were going to see kind of something similar unfold. Now I think that, you're going to see probably a lot more Robinson in the early downs. I think he's got a path to become that early down, first 2 down banger. I don't see that he's going to probably play a lot on third downs, but I will preface and say he is good in pass protection. Not, the smoothest pass catcher in the world, but sometimes you have guys out there. You see Dallas do that a lot with Zeke. People always want Pollard on the field, but a lot of times Zeke's out there because he can pass protect. And Washington's offensive line isn't great. Carson Wentz doesn't do great when there's pressure, so those two things kind of keep in mind. So I think Brian Robinson right now is a steal to kind of get your hands on. I think his value is going to go nothing but up moving forward. And I think J.D. McKissic's probably the safest guy to own right now because I don't think Washington's going to be all that great. I don't know how great their offensive line is going to be to open up holes, but one thing I am pretty sure of is that McKissic is going to catch the ball out of the backfield. I know people are concerned about Carson Wentz and, the narrative that he doesn't check the ball down. I kind of mentioned this on our car ride out to the date, to the expo, that, Boston Scott's in the league for a reason. We know who Boston Scott is because Carson Wentz threw the ball to him a lot out of the backfield when he was in Philadelphia. It's not something he can't do. Maybe he didn't do it a lot last year, but that's also kind of what the Colts offense was built last year to kind of do. So I think this offense is very different. You saw McKissic be involved early on in that first team preseason game with the first team, I should say, in the preseason game. Had a nice catch for about 17 yards. I think you can expect him to be the safest guy, especially in full point PPR.
Yeah, I would have to agree wholeheartedly with all of those things. Brian Robinson was certainly someone who I valued when he was coming into the league, especially for Dynasty. For Dynasty, I believe he was my RB4 coming into the league. So certainly someone that has some talent, now has a pathway, a clear pathway in a backfield that admittedly, when he landed here, it was hard to get excited. But again, now that pathway is kind of opened up, he's certainly someone that could take advantage rather quickly. Do you have anything else in this backfield before we go let's go to Carson Wentz's other former team in Philadelphia?
Yeah, I think this backfield's kind of concerning just as much. Miles Sanders, I think is kind of that Antonio Gibson, where is he really the coaching staff behind him? Do they really want to utilize him? How are they going to utilize him? I loved what I saw Miles Sanders running the ball last year. He averaged 5 yards per carry. He complemented Jalen Hurts really well. He just didn't get the ball very much, particularly in the red zone. Then you hear this role about Kenneth Gainwell being involved, early on. Will he be the Nyheim Hines role? Will that kind of will be the third down back? The one thing that scares me coming out of camp is that Miles Sanders seems to be struggling, where he used to be known as kind of a pass catcher, particularly coming into the league. He is really fighting the ball and struggling with making simple catches, and therefore we know this coaching staff isn't looking for guys to make mistakes in a sense. And Gibson's their similar experience where if you're not helping, then you're hurting. I think Miles Sanders might be playing himself out of any pass catching situations, which I think is something he could definitely do very well. He was given the opportunity again to do so, and therefore becomes an early down back. We saw that role for him last year. It's a role that can be very concerning, I think, because you just don't really know, is he going to get the utilization? Is Jalen Hurts going to vulture him in the red zone too often? I personally am buying Miles Sanders low because I think where his ADP is, he's got good value. You have a lot of other guys have similar questions. So I am a Miles Sanders investor right now, but I also understand that, I wouldn't advise going too high or, reaching on him in any capacity. I think that you want to make sure you're getting value, but a guy who can, be something, because as we saw last year, he was very efficient and very productive. And Jalen Hurts isn't going anywhere. So as long as you got that mobile running back, I'm always a big proponent of having their back out of that backfield.
Yeah, I mean, that there is kind of the key difference between Antonio Gibson and Miles Sanders, is that they're both getting kind of forced into this role just by these receiving backs. But the difference being Miles Sanders is an incredibly efficient runner. He didn't get into the end zone last year. That's kind of the concerning bit. We certainly need him to get some touchdowns because just, the 750 yards, yes, he was incredibly efficient running the ball, but that's not super helpful if you're not getting in the end zone. But it's a lot more understandable for someone like him to break off a couple runs and get in the end zone than Antonio Gibson, who's a less efficient runner, as well as being fumble prone. Miles Sanders on 137 carries last year only had one fumble. Certainly back in 2020 had a couple issues with it, but last year he wasn't that bad. So I don't know. I'm a little bit more high on a Miles Sanders type than I would be an Antonio Gibson for that reason. I just think he's a little bit safer. He's
Adam,
not in danger of completely getting phased out.
Are you buying Kenneth Gainwell, or what's your viewpoint of the news coming out? He's getting more and more involved in this offense.
I don't know, because I feel like that happened at spurts last year, and then he got, for whatever reason, supplanted by other receiving backs. It's not like the receiving back role was phased out; it was just taken away from him. So that gives me some pause. I don't know. It also, I kind of struggle with, in general, getting the receiving back for some of these running quarterbacks, especially one like a Jalen Hurts who isn't always looking to pass anyways. It's different for someone like a Russell Wilson or a Lamar who is either pass first or, just kind of depends on the situation. But Hurts is a lot of looking to run, which kind of scares me when it comes to someone like him.
Well, there's going to probably be somebody who does get this short yardage, quote unquote, opportunity to be that red zone running back. Will it be Sanders? What do you think about Boston Scott? I kind of mentioned him, and kind of facetiously, but he is still in that backfield as my co-host.
Well, and he did take it last year a little bit.
Yeah, well, Boston Scott was utilized in the red zone a lot, as he kind of pointed out last year, and it's a role that he's been kind of had different coaches utilize him in. So is Boston Scott like a sneaky guy to kind of keep your eye on, or are you kind of just avoiding this backfield other than Miles Sanders?
He is a sneaky one. I just don't know that he would get the volume that you would necessarily require. But as far as like a last pick, just kind of end your draft with, I don't mind it at all. because if you were to just take the most valuable touches in the game, I know you only got a couple of them, but you're getting the goal line looks, the red zone looks, you're getting some receptions. You take that receiving role back from Kenneth Gainwell again. It's an interesting situation you find yourself with where you're getting only 10 touches, but they're all valuable. So I certainly don't hate it. There's upside there.
Yeah, and I just want to, I don't disagree, and I also think that's a kind of guy to keep in your mind as probably the handcuff for Miles Sanders. Not that you're necessarily going out to get a handcuff for Miles Sanders, but there are some deeper leagues out there, and don't think Kenneth Gainwell is going to be that guy. I don't think you disagree with that.
No, I certainly don't expect Kenneth Gainwell to start taking a significant amount of carries. That's not something that I find to be particularly likely. Let's kind of wash our mouths from these not as good backfield. Talk about one where we can, I think at least, and I assume that you agree, I think that both of these guys can definitely coexist, especially given how this offseason has gone. And that's the Green Bay backfield with Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon. What do you think about this backfield? I mean, we saw last year Aaron Jones be really good, especially in those games where Devontae Adams was absent. He was a target hog. That's what makes things a lot more interesting. I think it'd be a little scary otherwise, just given how much A.J. Dillon was starting to vulture carries at the end of the year. But if Aaron Jones is able to continue to be, again, like a target hog, a PPR machine, I think you can absolutely see both of these guys have value. And you weren't seeing Aaron Jones necessarily taken off the field either. You were just adding an A.J. Dillon. So I don't know. What's your thought process with this backfield, Chris?
I 100% agree with you, Adam. Aaron Jones, to me, is an RB1 this year, and I don't have a whole question. I know that's not where his ADP is, and I'm kind of curious why. To your point, he's excelled when Devontae Adams hasn't been in there. He excels as a pass catcher. This offense isn't necessarily going to feature just one guy, but nor does it have to. They can definitely feed multiple guys. We've seen other teams do this previous. Saints jumped to mind, for example, Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram. We both eat, no problem. I think Aaron Jones kind of fills that more of that Alvin Kamara role, as you kind of are alluding to. He's going to be a good pass catcher. He's going to be a weapon, one of the better weapons, and a weapon that Aaron Rodgers knows and trusts. I think that's vital and important. So I think Aaron Jones, to me, is one of the safer guys you can have on your team this year. And A.J. Dillon's a guy that you can have both of them, and you should be actually targeting A.J. Dillon. I'm surprised his ADP is still kind of low in my book, a guy that I think was highly effective, as you kind of pointed out. Was almost a threat in some senses to Aaron Jones' job. And the notion that the guy can't catch the ball has kind of gone out the window. Had 34 receptions on 37 targets. So now you got to put him on your PPR radar as well. So I think A.J. Dillon is a guy that has, is on the upside, a guy that you definitely don't want to tackle as the season progresses. You'll hear me talk about this, some strategies sometimes. And one of the things I always encourage when draft time comes is, or even during your ads and, waiver wire, is adding a bigger back, a guy who's physical, or having that guy on your team as the season kind of progresses. Number one, teams wear down. They don't like tackling big guys. Number two, seasons change, as we all know. It gets colder. So a lot of times those bigger guys, you start seeing having, bigger games and start becoming Derrick Henry has a lot of breakouts during that time frame, for example. He might start off slow, but all of a sudden once the weather changes, Derrick Henry's a pain in the butt tackle. So A.J. Dillon, to me, playing Green Bay, playing in Chicago, playing in these different elements, a guy that's got, tree trunk legs, I think that's a guy that you want to have coming into your playoff run. So A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones are both guys I'm getting my hands on if I can.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, back in 2019, you saw both Kamara and Mark Ingram be top 15 backs when there really wasn't. It was just essentially Michael Thomas and those two guys, and those were the offensive weapons on the Saints. That projects to me very similar to what we see in Green Bay right now. I don't think it's that out of the question. You could see top 20, top 15 finishes from both of these backs, and both of these guys would be values if that was to be the case. And that was in PPR. Mark Ingram was up there. So certainly, again, something to look at. I again, really like both of these backs. Agree with everything you said there. I just, think it's really interesting because that's a pretty recent example where you got, again, 2 backs from the same backfield be some really good value players. So I think we kind of covered Green Bay. So we can move on to Houston. This is another one that's really fascinating. So Damien Pierce had a pretty good, I'll admit, he had a really good preseason game this past week. A couple receptions, but the big thing is he had 5 carries for, I want to say, like 49, 50 yards, somewhere in that ballpark. I mean, he broke off a nice 20-yarder or so. So Chris, I know you weren't high on him coming into this draft, but has the hype over the last, through training camp, through some of these joint practices, and now making it into the preseason stage. Does that kind of have changed how you're thinking about this situation where, at least on the preseason field, he outperformed some of these veteran guys? Does that give you any look at the Texans running backs?
I don't necessarily think that what I saw in preseason is going to change my mind per se. He did have his first carry, nice 20-yard run. It did show good bursts, and I will give him that. That was something that I thought that people kind of just gave him. I hadn't really seen that in Florida as much as people assumed. I know he was very efficient, but I also think he wasn't doing anything spectacular. It jumped off, the video to me. Having said that, we know Rex Burkhead's about 95 years old, probably the most talented guy in the world. Doesn't really have a future, you would think, for Houston moving forward too much. The guy that I was hopeful for is Marlon Mack. I haven't really heard good or bad out of it, which could be concerning because you'd rather hear that Marlon Mack's looking great, looking fast, looking explosive, but all you kind of hear is the hype from Damien Pierce. I do think Lovie Smith coaching staffs and or teams, I should say, and I am curious to see kind of Peppa Hamilton's reaction, but typically they play veteran guys in the beginning. We saw that kind of even last year where the veteran guys got the opportunity first. There was a lot of hype about some of their younger guys that they were willing to give a chance that people thought should get a chance throughout the season. But you kept seeing those veteran guys throughout the season over and over again. David Johnson went away, but then there was Rex Burkhead. So it was never really kind of turned over to the young guys. I'm curious to see, can Pierce pass protect? Can he do all of the things you kind of alluded to that get you on the field, not just nice running? There's a lot of running backs who are explosive, who can run, but the other little things can keep you off the field. I think that might be partly why he didn't play a lot in Florida all the time. So I am curious to see if that's going to be something that's going to come out more. But I do say that, it definitely piqued my curiosity a lot more. I can't close my eyes to the Texans offense while I want to. I do think that they made improvements to their offensive line. I'm a huge Green fan. I think that was an outstanding draft pick by them. He's going to pay off, I think, big time. And I think that, having both the tackles coming back are going to be a nice, thing for them. I hate Davis Mills, though, and I'm not really a big fan of most of the offense in general. So I'm, looking at Pierce, but I'm not necessarily buying the hype quite yet where people are probably overspending on him. I'm going to kind of wait to see if there's good value. I'll take them, but I'm not going to encourage you to, now you got to get your hands on Damien Pierce.
All right. I think that's a pretty level-headed take. I find it really interesting just kind of how this backfield has situated itself. Just because I don't know how valuable, even if he does get a big role, I just don't know how valuable that role is going to be because I think he projects to be that first, second down guy, and he projects to be that goal line guy. But if that offense sucks, how much does that really matter? The only back that's going to matter is your third down guy. That's still likely Rex Burkhead. If Damien Pierce starts, doing well catching out of the backfield, then maybe I'll change my tune. And that's not to say I have Damien Pearson in a couple dynasty leagues where I drafted him in the rookie draft, 3rd, 4th round. That's where I felt like value made sense. But where he's starting to go in some redraft leagues, there's some current startups and things like that. It's getting out of hand a little bit. But we'll see. I could totally be wrong, and I think he's a talented guy, definitely a good runner. We'll just need to see, like you said, those little things. Can he do them well? He definitely has the frame to pass protect, but does he have the experience of doing it a lot? That's where those reps are going to need to happen. Why a veteran could still reign supreme at least week 1. I do think we'll see him kind of take over this backfield some point this season, but whether or not, again, that role is super valuable, remains to be seen. We saw Mark Ingram, who granted is older for a running back. We saw Mark Ingram have some games where he was 20 carries, getting plenty of volume, but they didn't amount to anything. He was getting 60 yards, and since if he didn't get into the red zone, you weren't getting anything out of him. And this isn't a team that's going to have a lot of positive game scripts anyways.
Well, Adam, I'll give you a comparison that jumps to mind for me when I look at him and where I kind of think that maybe he has some value, but also can just screw you as well. Taysom Williams for the Baltimore Ravens last year kind of burst onto the scene, ran really well, and then disappeared because of those veterans, as you kind of talking about, started playing over. I think this is a similar situation where I think Pierce is going to have the opportunity to flash because I think he's the more talented guy. And I will go, I'm going to kind of double down on my scouting report on Green, where I do think he's going to be worth extra yard per carry for this offense. I'll venture to say that. But I think that still could make it, 20 carries for 40 yards and 20 carries for 60 yards still isn't great value. But if now you're starting to sniff around a little bit more. So I do see some of the pathway to Pierce having some value. I just think that a lot of times people, get caught up in rookie hype, and this guy has a lot of hype coming into this draft. So I don't want people buying too high because I think that's what you're kind of risking. Where, as you're kind of alluding to, it's not a guarantee you're getting anything. This is Houston. Don't forget, guys. And then on top of it, a guy who never has shown you he's been a bell cow throughout his career yet. So you can't just assume he's going to go in there and all of a sudden be the stud.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the point here. This is someone to monitor. This is someone, if he falls into your lap, absolutely feel good about taking him. But know that this is a calculated risk with someone like him. He is not a sure thing. He is not someone that you should be reaching for, not someone you should be overspending for. At the right value, he is someone with upside that you can go ahead and take. He can help you out, but, don't have too high of expectations for Damien Pierce, I guess is the point. You brought up some rookie hype, and this is a guy who this is a situation I had for a little bit later in the show. But let's talk about Isaiah Pacheco and the Chiefs now. I think we're kind of in a similar enough topic.
Real quick before we move on, do you buy anybody else in that Houston backfield? Are you touching Rex Burkhead? Are you touching, a Marlon Mack?
In a deep league, I have, unfortunately, Rex Burkhead interest. We're talking more of like what you're going to see of like Dynasty, where you've got a 20-person bench, like that type of like, okay, my roster is 25 people. Like, that's where it's like, if Rex Burkhead gets the receiving role and they do have a lot of negative game scripts, you can kind of see that pathway to him having some at least flex value. The pathway exists. If you can get him for basically free, and you should be able to in normal people leagues, I don't hate it. There's less valuable things that you're going to find on the waiver wire for sure. But again, let's talk about the Chiefs. Isaiah Pacheco, our Rutgers guy. We've heard a lot from Dan about Pacheco over the weekend. So what's your take of this backfield? Is this a situation where twofolded question here, I guess, that I want your answer to? One, can someone like Isaiah Pacheco kick Ronald Jones out of this roster entirely? And if he can, does being the RB2 here, like, is that something that has enough value for you to grab him where he's starting to go? Because again, this is another guy. This is why I brought him up kind of in tandem with Damien Pierce. The rookie hype is certainly getting up there for a guy who I believe signed on to the Patriots, either was undrafted or a late pick.
The 7th round pick.
7th round. I was going to say, who was late or undrafted. But at any rate, yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, this guy's also very explosive, so I don't want to underplay what he kind of brings to the table. We've seen Terrell Davis, an undrafted free agent, run for 2,000 yards. So it's always all about where you get drafted, and I don't think you believe that. But I think that one of the things that stands out to me is there's two things I'm kind of, as you're alluding to. One, take this with a grain of salt. This is a Kansas City situation. We always hear about, how long are we waiting for Josh Gordon to explode? How long will LaShawn McCoy going to explode? Le'Veon Bell was going to explode. We hear constantly about Jarrett McKinnon's going to explode. These other guys that every time somebody enters the Kansas City equation, the Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, Wonderland in a sense, everybody wants to just kind of go crazy. I feel like you're seeing we'll get to a team like this, like Buffalo. Your offense is good, so therefore everybody's going to be awesome. And every news that comes out, every time they look good, they're going to be the guy. Having said all that, he is a very impressive guy when he put it on the tape. Explosive, a bigger guy for how explosive he is. Rutgers did not have a good offensive line. Against some games that they were definitely inferior, and he ran his butt off. And he ran hard, he runs physical, and he's picking up all the different things we're talking about in camp. He's able to run out in different places on the field. Yes, I think he absolutely is a threat to Ronald Jones' job. And I think that if Ronald Jones, who does not play special teams, doesn't kind of, shine in some kind of way or make it, crystal clear that he deserves to be that guy, why wouldn't you, if you're the Chiefs, not pay a guy $2 or $3 million where you definitely could use some extra, wiggle room to add another guy here or there, particularly on defense possibly, or even maybe a receiver, OBJ. But also on the flip side, adds an explosive element to your offense that you can move around. I'm hearing a lot of Kareem Hunt comp. I don't want to drink the Kool-Aid too much. So as you kind of alluded to, it is Kansas City, as I kept saying. We've heard about guys go back as Niles Davis back in the day. Kansas City can seem to have that backfield guy that you have to have, but we've seen typically the studs have been studs. A lot of the other guys has kind of gotten a lot of hype, but haven't really materialized how you kind of wanted to. So I wouldn't go, giving my whole draft up to get Pacheco, but I think he's a guy that you definitely have the value right now. Even if he's creeping up the board, still has enough value for me to take a shot on. And where I would definitely double down, you hear anything about Ronald Jones, he moves on. Yes, you definitely want to have a second back in this Kansas City backfield because you saw Darrell Williams have a great role last year, be effective even with CHE healthy. They both were able to eat. So CHE hasn't been healthy the last couple of years, so you're kind of banking on that part as well, just insurance. But having Pacheco also is a part where you can play him possibly as a flex option, as Darrell Williams kind of offered myself, towards the end of the season last year, and CHE. So I think this is we know that the pass catching guys, receiving core are kind of still questionable. These backs definitely could be a big part of this offense, and Pacheco could definitely be a guy to kind of keep your eye on. The value hasn't gone too rich for my blood yet, but the hype might get to a point where it does. So just kind of keep your eye on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the really intriguing thing about Pacheco in relation to some of those other guys, those other names you bring up, like the LaShawn McCoys, some of those other running back names, specifically even Josh Gordon at the receiver position, is that the hype for those kind of built up when that signing happened.
I think Darwin Thompson, though.
Yeah.
Go through the running backs for the Kansas City for the last couple of years. That second running back has gotten hyped. Whatever the young guy, like I said, Darwin Thompson, I forget the other guy they had was a similar guy, real fast, and all we heard about was wait till he gets his chance. Sorry, Adam, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, agreed. But what I'm saying is, I guess, is that there's starting to be enough smoke around this one where I want, again, to an extent, this is still another calculated risk where there's a lot of hype and you don't want to go too overboard, but where he's at right now, I don't know if we're overboard yet because he is the one. Patrick Mahomes in the preseason game played 11 snaps. Pacheco was on the field for some of those snaps. Ronald Jones was not. That matters to me. We're seeing a lot of highlights of Pacheco playing well in the receiving game for a 6'1", 220 back. That matters to me for a guy that's big. So he's showing his receiving chops. He's playing with Mahomes or trusting him to pass protect for Mahomes already as a rookie in a preseason game where you're like, Andy Reid would get crucified if he let something happen to Patrick Mahomes in the preseason. So to trust, a seventh round rookie with that, even if it is just for a couple snaps, I think that does speak some kind of volume. Again, especially when you're not doing that with Ronald Jones, he definitely seems like he has that pathway to be that second back. And with how CEH has, the last couple of years have gone for him, it's certainly his backfield until it isn't. But he is in danger of if, there's more injuries or if things keep popping up, it could be almost that time.
Yeah, and I definitely, like I alluded to, I think these guys are both that you can kind of have in your team and not be worried about using both of them. I think they're going to both have opportunities to eat whoever that second running back is. On the MD's Fantasy Football Show, we talked about our sleepers. Dan had, Ronald Jones is one of his sleepers, and I think that could be, it's more that role. And as you kind of alluded to, Pacheco could be a cheaper, more explosive guy who can catch the ball. So you're going to have a choice between Ronald Jones and Jerry McKinnon, and that's where I think that you might see Ronald Jones kind of get moved on from because they need pass catchers, and more weapons you can kind of versatility you can offer in Kansas City right now, I think isn't going to be welcomed. So yeah, I think this is definitely a chance for this to happen. And you made some great points.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to move back up to our original list here. We're going to look at the Seattle backfield. We talked a little bit about Kenneth Walker already. We were monitoring an injury with him. So definitely that's something to keep in mind throughout all of this. But otherwise, kind of what are your thoughts with this backfield? Because I think this is one, to me, where I am worried about that injury 100%. More of a monitoring thing, but does it worry you a little bit? I think so. However, I think we expected anyways for Rashad Penny to be the guy to start the season and for Kenneth Walker to kind of have a slow takeover, kind of what we saw with Javonte last year, where we went into the season thinking at the very least, okay, Melvin Gordon's going to start with a 70-30 and Javonte Williams is going to slowly seep into that, to where now this year we're expecting that 60-40 in Javonte's favor. So I think that's kind of more what we're expecting with Kenneth Walker anyways, where it was going to be Rashad Penny to start the season. Either he, A, would get hurt, or B, you'd start to slowly phase in Kenneth Walker as he shows how great of a runner he is. And he was arguably the best pure runner in this past draft class.
Yeah, and the good thing for him, where he was trending up was they was hearing good things about him in pass protection and catching the ball out of the backfield. And Pete Carroll, saying he could be a 3-down back. Mm-hmm. This Seattle team does definitely usually has a pass catching role for their backs. Even Chris Carson, while he could catch the ball, usually kind of tended to come up the field, whether it was for Rashad Penny at points, DJ Dallas,
even Travis Homer,
J.D. McKissick. That's why he has a job in Washington. So they were always kind of looking different guys to kind of utilize in that passing attack. So it is something to kind of monitor. I tend to agree with you. It reminds me, a lot of the Denver situation. And I don't know if that split ever kind of goes, one way or another extreme. I think you're going to see, Pete Carroll and the Seattle offense make every effort to try to involve both of them. And I think a good comparison, Sean Waldron comes from the Sean McVay tree in a sense in that Rams offense. And we saw when Todd Gurley moved on, kind of that split backfield where you had Malcolm Brown and you had, Henderson. Usually those kind of guys we're hearing more about. We'll get to in a little bit about the Rams. They're kind of what they're doing with their backs. I think you might see that this is going to guys will have their roles. They might play maybe rotate series, but I do think you're going to see both these guys on the field, and I think that's going to probably be closer to a 50-50 split or that Denver split as you kind of alluded to. I don't know if any guy's going to kind of shine out as being the guy unless somebody gets hurt, but I think it doesn't really change that for me. Where I kind of agree with you was that Rashad Penny was probably going to be a guy that you could definitely have in your lineups early on, and kind of see what happens after that. And Walker, to me, was a guy you kind of were waiting to see what's your role going to be for sure. So now this hernia thing, depending on how severe or how long it could be, shouldn't really change your plans. Walker, to me, could still be that a playoff winner, as I kind of keep saying on the show. But sometimes you want that guy who's going to kind of hit his boom. Javonte Williams, hit his nice stride towards the end of the season last year and kind of carried people, and that momentum kind of carried you to the playoffs. You might have Walker in a similar situation. So I still would, buying Walker over Penny, still the guy I prefer to own, but I definitely think it kind of solidifies that Rashad Penny probably has value. And you've seen this guy's ADP pretty far down, I think, where people just kind of, just skip right over him. He could be a sneaky guy to have in your first 6 to 8 weeks and maybe even the whole season. Melvin Gordon didn't fall off the cliff last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Rashad Penny, I think, will still have value. These are two guys that can coexist. We're running a little low on time here, though, so we want to run through these last few teams. Next, we'll go hit the Bills really quick. What do you think about the Bills situation? They've got kind of these three backs. Obviously, it seems Zach Moss is going to be the guy that takes the complete back seat. But do you think that there's anyone with fantasy viability in Buffalo at the running back spot?
I am buying Devin Singletary at his ADP right now. Is it a guy, finished really strongly towards the end of the year? I do think that his days are limited in a sense. We're hearing about Zach Moss becoming, maybe involved again in this offense, God forbid. So you might have a trio. Ken Dorsey had something similar when he was in Miami. They used a lot of running backs in Miami. The different guys had different roles. So I wouldn't be surprised if you do see all three guys. Plus, we all know Josh Allen runs the ball. So for me, I love kind of the value, like I said, of where he's rated is as a guy that has a lot of upside potential and showing you can do something. I'm not a big buyer on Cook yet. I know the hype isn't kind of met the reality for me yet still. Talk about a quarterback who doesn't check the ball down very often. I got to see Josh Allen check the ball down, first of all, and I got to see James Cook kind of where he falls on his food chain. I think the idea sounds greater than the actual reality on the field. And Zach Moss, I'm not going to get burned by taking him, but it is the guy that I'll be monitoring because if he gets that short yardage situation and he can catch the ball, I kind of alluded to the guys who can kind of do a little bit of everything are usually the guys who I like to kind of, get my hands on. So that's a guy I'll be monitoring.
All right, we'll move on to that next backfield. You alluded to the Miami Dolphins back in the day with Dorsey. Now that they have a backfield kind of situation blooming of their own. The predominant names here are Mostert and Edmonds, but Michel is only kind of peeking around the corner as well. So what do you make of this situation? I know that I definitely want my hands on a Chase Edmonds right now, but Mostert's really interesting too in his own right.
I totally agree. It was Miami Hurricanes, just to clarify, wasn't the Dolphins that Ken Dorsey was on. But yes, in the Miami area, to me, I'm buying Chase Edmonds all day, every day. The other guys, I think, are sneaky. They have good ADP value. Whatever you kind of pick your preference, I lean towards Mostert because he's shown that he's been effective. If he's healthy, he uses guys really been great in his offense, even just in that early, 1-2 down role. He can be, good enough getting 15 carries because he's so explosive that he can make it worth it. So that's the guy I'm kind of watching. I like Sonny Michel. I've been a big fan of Sonny Michel. I just feel like where he kind of falls in the offense is going to be kind of, will he get a short yardage role? Will he kind of be the red zone guy? I don't know. But I know Mostert's been in the offense, knows the coaching staff. So I'm going to lean towards Mostert as that flyer I would take. But Edmonds is the guy that I prefer in that backfield.
All right. Yeah, I tend to agree on kind of that hierarchy there. I really wish, to be honest with you, that Michel ended up somewhere better. Michel, the former Patriot, let's move to New England. What do you think about this situation with Ramondre Stevenson kind of being this guy that's building a lot of hype right now? You talked briefly, and I don't think that there's anything that's really come out of it, and I don't think that there will be anything to come out of it that got to a point where there were rumors of a Damien Harris trade. However, on the flip side, while today Bill Belichick said something about he really liked what Ramondre Stevenson was doing and thought that he could be a great third down back and that, he was really good in that role. However, you're also still seeing in 2-minute drills at practice, same day that Bill Belichick says that Ty Montgomery is coming in and playing that role. They really like that they can, motion him out to wide receiver if they need to. So what do you make of this situation? Ramondre Stevenson, someone that this show as a whole kind of was really high on coming into the league. He showed a lot of talent last year. So again, what are your thoughts with Ramondre?
Yeah, I'm still buying on Ramondre. This guy didn't have any official role last year and started becoming productive as the season progressed. He had a nice 4-game stretch there where I think that he's going to be a decent flex option, if nothing less. But I think he has a pathway to be an RB2 potential, definitely an RB3 potential, a guy that's involved in the passing attack and running attack. I don't think he's necessarily going to be the primary pass catcher, as you're kind of alluding to. I think that in situations where you want to kind of get mismatches, the James White as we roll will say it is that guy who can beat the linebacker over and over again, kind of get the mismatch. I can move you out here, I can move you over there. He's not doing that, so I can see why Montgomery still has a role. But it isn't like Ramondre Stevenson has to come down every third down. Where it's 3rd and 5, he can't be out in the field. To me, the closest comparison you've kind of seen, for Patriots most recent would be that Rex Burkhead guy we were talking about earlier. The guy who kind of did a little bit of everything for him. He scored in the red zone, can catch the ball. So I think Ramondre Stevenson's the guy that I like the upside for. I think the coaching staffs are excited about what he can do. I'm not too worried about Montgomery stealing, too many of his catches. In a sense, I do agree that I don't think he's going to be the guy always out there on second, on 2-minute drills or 4-minute drills. There could be Montgomery time. There could be, depending on what matchups they're having or game. We see the Patriots kind of match up against their opponents. So I wouldn't be, locked in on Ramondre Stevenson. Always going to be that pass catching guy. But I think you're going to get enough of everything for a guy who's just, a tremendous runner. I keep talking about the pass catching part, but great runner, great physical guy. And I talked about, weather. New England's not warm as the season progresses. So having a guy who can be physical and big, I definitely think he's a guy you want to have on your team. But just real quick, Adam, Damien Harris, look, everybody keeps talking about regression, what guys can't do from they did last year. Totally agree. Not going to score 16 touchdowns. So if he scores 8 or 10, the ADP he's at right now, why not have him on your roster? Damien Harris should not be forgotten about. You talked about some of the things that have been coming out in Patriot camp. One of the things that have been coming out is Pierre Strong's not looking good. Some of the other guys aren't looking good. So Damien Harris, if he's not traded, has a role in this offense. Is good. Guy averaging over 5 yards per carry isn't chop liver out there. So I think he's gotten kind of just a bum rap and kind of forgotten about as the hype kind of swept up Ron Stevenson. But I'm buying both those guys.
Yeah, 100% agreed. We have one more team here. I think another situation where buying both the guys might be interesting, at least because of the potential role of one of them. The Jacksonville Jaguars is going to be our last team to kind of wrap this one up with. At least in PPR, I think ETN makes a lot of sense. James Robinson, the comeback is looking pretty good. He was in 7-on-7 drills today, running some routes, taking a couple carries again in 7-7, so nothing crazy. It's not like he was getting tackled or anything like that. But it looks like at least you'll see him early in the season. Probably not the preseason. He might not make it back for week 1, but I think you'll see him kind of on that Zach Wilson timetable, if you will.
Yeah, I don't know what James Robinson's EDP is. I believe last time I saw was like below the 40s. Get your hands. You're hoping your league drafts sooner than later because James Robinson is a guy that the value is just there. We take a lot of different shots about Damien Pierce taking different shots on guys. James Robinson's absolutely a guy to throw your dart at if you can get your hands on him and later on your rounds because he can and has shown you he can be an RB1.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the key with him. I've said this a million times this show throughout the offseason. I can't discount a guy who has shown high ability and high production on an offense when the offense is bad. Like, it's hard to be a productive running back on a bad offense. So when someone can do that, it's like, okay, like you're pretty good at this. You may not be some stud, but you're at least pretty good. Like you certainly have something here. So if he's able to continue kind of his current progression with his comeback, definitely a guy that you're going to want to have on your team at current ADP. Now, Chris, I think that'll wrap us up. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. What's the schedule for the Belly Up MDFF show this week? I know you have a show coming out tomorrow, right? A pre-recorded one, perhaps?
We'll be doing some mock drafting. So you can catch us doing our mock draft. We kind of talked about the expo, the drafts that we've participated. So we're going to kind of share some of our knowledge and some of our takes, the picks that we have. We have different people joining us on our draft. So I'm super excited to do this and kind of share, different people's perspective of what you do wherever you're falling as we get into draft season.
Cool. And when are you getting back into your full swing of things schedule for the regular season? Will that just be week 1? Are you getting a little build-up period? Kind of what's your...
Yeah, so we'll start kind of picking up the more and more episodes. You're going to start seeing it 3 times a week. Then you're going to start seeing it increasing as the season kind of progresses. As you kind of alluded to, when the season kickoff, we'll have our wrap-ups. We'll have our previews. So that's definitely going to expand our show. And then we'll start also doing DFS on Fridays again, where we'll be giving you DFS, insight and also betting. We have our, Chaz is going to be rejoining us again, giving us you guys some tips of what you were to kind of do for your drafts, DFS, and also for, like I said, betting. So yeah, we're definitely ramping up the show. A lot more to come, and hope everybody tunes in and checks us out.
Yeah, awesome. Definitely have to tune in once it gets a little closer to the season. Make some money with you guys on the betting DFS side and everything else. Of course, I'm sure that mock draft will be great. We are still taking signups for the Belly Up Bowl. We had a great time kind of showing some people that at the Fantasy Football Expo. So go check out the bellyupfantasysports.com. There's a little tab. It's right next to the home tab for Belly Up Bowl. The website's been completely reworked. It's so much cleaner now. So shout out to everyone for helping with that. But with that, it'll be really easy to go over, sign up for the Belly Up Bowl. It's with Alex's Lemonade Stand. We're helping to fight childhood cancer. It's the 3rd consecutive year of the Belly Up Bowl. through 2 seasons, they've raised around $2,400. We're closing in on how many players we had from last year. So hopefully we're able to do a little bit better than last year. That would be really awesome. So make sure to go join that. Thank you so much again for tuning in. We will see you here pretty soon.